Hi, everybody. It's Kevin Sabrin with the Channel Chatter podcast, and I want to welcome you to our weekly episode. Of course, on Channel Chatter, we talk about the tips, tricks, tools, and tactics to help you sales and marketing professionals thrive in your channel environment. Well, this week, we have a special guest. Her name is Angela Raddant. She's spent almost 20 years in the outdoor power equipment industry. She's a true powerhouse when it comes to product strategy, understanding customer journey, how dealers build relationships with both residential and commercial buyers. From the supply chain to sales and marketing and even operations, Angela's really worn all the hats. Trust me, she's got some wonderful insights to share. Today, specifically, we're going to be diving into the shift towards battery power, evolving customer expectations in our post-COVID world, and how dealers can adapt to those changes ahead. Not to mention, she's a leading female marketer in this space, in this somewhat male-dominated industry. She's got some wonderful insights on that too. So not only will you appreciate her and her thought leadership, but her history and capabilities in the OPE market. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Angela Raddant. Angela Raddant, welcome to the Channel Chatter podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
You are so welcome. So we have had 3 conversations now. This is number 3, right?
Yeah, a
And
couple of conversations.
just a couple. And in the first 2, you wowed me with a bunch of thoughts and some visions, some maybe like visionary perspective on kind of what you've seen over your time in the outdoor power equipment industry. So before we start delving into that and let me pick at some of those threads, pulling at those threads, tell me first, how long have you been in the outdoor power industry?
Near to 20 years, so about 19 years. So I started in outdoor power right after college. So, and I've done a number of different things within the manufacturing space, specifically in the industry, from operations to supply chain to sales and marketing. And so I've covered a number of different roles, gotten to know kind of the suppliers to that industry, the channel. Specifically, we're talking about like the dealer channel, the national retail channel, all of those types of threads within this industry I've been able to touch through those almost 20 years. And so my perspective brings in kind of all of those different ties within the industry, which is kind of unique. And then also, as we were talking about, being a woman in this industry, there's a little bit different perspective there as well.
I want to hear all about that. First, can I ask you, do you have there's a lot of range there in what you described in your roles. Do you have a favorite? Did you camp out in a one spot that really spoke to you?
Yeah, everything kind of centers around product direction and strategy. So product road mapping, thinking about who that customer is and how we can go to market with that product. So I would say, leading the product strategy for the organization is really where my heart lies, but it ties in all of those elements that I talked about.
This may not be a fair question, given that you were a baby coming out of college and jumping right into OPE and having your entire experience there. But I'm kind of curious, do you feel like the outdoor power equipment world or our space is more product centric in our approach to customers, or or is it similar to other industries? What's your best takeaway on that?
Well, especially in the dealer channel, I do feel like it is customer centric. When a customer goes into that dealership, often they're thinking a lot about who they're going to buy this product from. It's a large purchase. It's a durable consumer good, something that they're going to have for a long time, and that they know that they might need service or parts later in the life of the equipment. And so I think they're as much thinking about who they're buying from as what it is they're buying. So they're often trusting the salesman's perspective at the dealership about what they should be buying specifically. And so I do think this industry is very much about, customer-led sales strategies, really thinking about that customer and what their needs are. And the consumer themselves is deciding based on the place as much as they are the product itself. And so if that dealership has only certain brands of products or certain types of products available in that dealership, they may gravitate obviously towards those because they trust who they're buying it from.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I want to pick at that, pull at that thread a little bit, because I want to understand the consumer versus the commercial sort of play there. In the lawnmower space, particularly, you've managed some brands like when you're describing that customer that wants to go to the dealer and be led through that buying decision. Is that as true today? Number one, is that as true today as it used to be? And if so, are we talking about the contractors or the sort of homeowners mowing their own lawn?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in my response there, I was thinking more about homeowners and consumers,
Hmm.
but the commercial landscapers and that niche of folks too, they often come to trust a dealership and return that business over time, and they build a relationship there, and they wouldn't really go anywhere else for a piece of equipment or for repairs or parts that they need. They're often centering around a specific dealership to be their go-to for things that they need. So I think it's even more so in those cases. They're shopping for a partner in their business that's going to supply them with the products that their livelihood depends on. On the consumer side, I think the ability to find so much information online does change the game. And so almost all consumers are researching online before they step into any retail environment. And so I think things like dealer locators, lead generation software, all of those types of things are critical now in this industry as much as they've ever been, because someone might be going out and just testing the waters, seeing what kind of equipment might be right, and then using like a dealer locator, for example, and then walking into the store with some knowledge in their head before they walk in, what they might get for a trade-in, what they, what price range they're looking at, what brands they might be interested in. They have some knowledge of that before walking into the store more than ever before. And so it's important that the dealer acknowledge that and be prepared for that kind of knowledge from their consumers, unlike they might have had experience to previously.
Well said. All right, that helps a lot, and I thought you might answer it that way. One of the things that my company does is we look at this future of buying studies, what we call it, and we'll typically take a vertical and really analyze what the customer expectations were before the sale and then after the sale. So, in other words, imagine we're surveying them and saying, "All right, you set out to buy a widget of some sort, and then you bought it or you didn't buy it, but what was that customer journey like? Did the brand or did the dealer meet you where you were at in the process?" So in other words, you described like wanting to do online research in advance. So I think most of us would say browsers expect like pricing information or general spec
Mhm.
information. That's kind of table stakes. But would I be able to compare units to determine like two models of a zero turn, or what can I configure it to see what it would look like with or without a canopy or with or without an EFI motor or
Mhm.
whatever that, modification might be. That's like a more mature level of web interaction, and we're seeing a lot more of that. I don't know if we're seeing it as much as what browsers expect it. And I know we're not seeing that because we see the study year after year, especially since COVID. I think what that seemed to do was condition people that you ought to be able to do more online. You had to do it online. Now that COVID's over, like, what's your thought on that? Like, have we kind of taken the ball and run with it as a channel or as an industry, or are we falling short of kind of what the consumer expects online?
Yeah, we're definitely falling short, I feel like. And it's interesting because, I feel like power sports and marine and automotive certainly are far ahead of outdoor power equipment in most of those ways. And so, following the lead of some of those industries that are more mature in that way and thinking about customers. And I think that's true not just in the technology and the tools available online for that research that the customers are doing, but it's also true in retail, the retail environment of the dealer store itself. And so there's definitely some, some upgrades that can be made in the customer experience once they walk into that dealership. So merchandising and the kind of marketing that we do in store, the experience that customer has as they walk in. Outdoor power equipment has kind of lagged behind some of these other industries I mentioned in a number of those regards. So I don't think it's necessarily just as much the COVID, bubble and those things, but it's kind of OPE catching up with some of these other industries that are much ahead of the game than we are.
That makes sense. If I look at our portfolio, just my company, for example, if I look at our portfolio and RV, marine, outdoor rec, it's far surpasses what we would call commercial industrial. So that is an indication that brands on that side of the fence are interacting more quickly or more aggressively or more assertively with regard to
Yeah.
manage their online presence through the whole ecosystem. So I think your
It could be the
observation
little bit higher price points, I don't know.
true.
Or, maybe it's more so that outdoor power equipment is kind of seen as a needed product. It's a necessary product, not a luxury good or a want.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that's part of the reasons why it's lagged behind somewhat.
Makes sense. I mean, I always think of it like must-haves versus nice-to-haves, right? So
Yeah.
it'd be nice to have
Like
a
an RV, a boat,
yeah,
a four-wheeler, but a mower you need, so.
it sure seems like it. You referenced women in leadership and an article that you were involved in OPE. I think it was put on by Ideal or C Systems, if I remember. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience and some of the people you met and maybe what some of your takeaways were?
Yeah, I've always really focused on networking with women within our industry. I think it's necessary for any of us as women within this industry to have those connections, build that network of individuals that are kind of having the similar experiences to you. And so this was an opportunity to partner with, as you said, Constellation or Ideal C Systems, also with several other women leaders that I've interacted with throughout my career. So some of the women that were participated in that were in adjacent industries, like you mentioned, marine or power sports and some of those areas. But definitely, these are areas in which there isn't as many women participating in the spaces. And so hearing our perspectives on the challenges that are facing these, this industry and the channel specifically, and how we can utilize and leverage the experienced women within the industry was one of the main goals of the opportunity.
Yeah, there's some powerhouse comments in there. I'm going to share a link in the show notes afterwards, but any one interaction stand out to you or anybody that your thoughts you're going to take with you for a while?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things were, this is just preceding the economic downturn that we're now experiencing, and it's interesting how all of the advice was, "Hey, something is coming, and here's how we need to prepare." So, every one of us said, you need to get your house in order because this economic downturn is coming. Think about what brands have supported you through the good times, and think about what your inventory levels look like. Think about what your staffing looks like. Think about service and parts and those sides of your business, as they'll be the sides of your business that continue to sustain you through economic difficulty, because we know we've been there before, right? We've seen economic downturns before. And it's interesting how much that service revenue and that parts revenue can help sustain a dealer when power equipment sales are down.
Well, you jumped ahead of my list for you, but that was exactly the question I was going to have is like, tell me about this economic turn. Before I ask you that specific question, I went to the Outdoor Power Equipment Institute annual
Mhm.
meeting in Jacksonville and heard from an
Yep.
economist who are talking about like inflation being a trajectory for the next 5 years and basically described as being kind of an unstoppable component of our economy. Baby boomers at the age that they are, and we talked about Social Security and some of those things that are and Medicare, Medicaid being huge impacts and so forth. It's not going away. But the good news was that wages are climbing or wages are increasing and staying somewhat commensurate. So even though stuff is getting more expensive, our demographic that are the people buying our mowers, for example, are still, for the most part, going to have the funds to be able to buy it. But so I just want to plant that background in there because I thought that was a
Mhm.
wonderful piece, very well researched, and kudos to the OPEI group for bringing that information forward. And also, it was sort of a calming thing, like, hold on, let's not get crazy. the world isn't going to end per se, but some things are changing. Things are definitely getting more expensive. And there was this theme that was synonymous with what you described as kind of getting your house in order. And I liked what you said about focusing on the parts and the service. And not only are you bringing in more revenue from those activities and creating a healthier environment for your dealership, like as a P&L, but you're also deepening your relationships with at least the commercial side of the business, if not the consumer. Can you tell me a little more about that? I know you've done a lot of research in that area.
Yeah, a couple of things you mentioned stood out to me. The first is, commercial contractors and landscape contractors. Those are really secure areas of the business to continue to focus on. So selling to other businesses, those kind of entities tend to still buy, when the chips are down kind of thing. Consumer spending is down only because, they may not have the level of savings that they had during COVID, and interest rates are high. So if they're having to borrow to buy a mower, that is a more difficult thing for, a small consumer to do. But I think there's just, a number of macro trends that are influencing, continued desire for lawn and garden equipment in particular, and that would be home ownership. I mean, people are still wanting to get in houses, and that's why we've had such inflation in home prices, because people are still wanting to own homes, and they're still wanting acreage with those homes, and so that's continuing to drive the need for outdoor power equipment. Also, when we talk about landscape contractors, there's more and more desire to participate in a gig economy, and, small scale landscape contractors and starting businesses like that, are just as lucrative as they would have been in the past. And more and more folks that have the means would outsource, those tasks in their, in their homes. And so, those two things are continuing to drive additional demand, for outdoor power equipment. I think that most of what we're seeing isn't necessarily a decrease in demand from consumers. It's kind of this bubble of inventory that we're still pushing through as an industry. So, with how high demand was during COVID, we just kept pushing, as manufacturers, pushing it into the dealer channel. So they were sitting on all this inventory, and then interest rates went high. So floor plan was exacerbated for both dealers and manufacturers. And so as that inventory comes down, manufacturers are just going to have to, get tight for a while that inventory kind of dwindles down. But I'm just not seeing dealers wanting to carry the level of inventory that they were during those years. So I think that the best strategy for dealers is to keep that inventory low as they can, and be as nimble as they can with where they're purchasing from, to not bring in too much inventory as we enter in this new normal.
Yeah, for sure. I've been around OPE since I guess, early to mid 90s, but lawnmower specifically, that space in early 2001, I guess it was. So that's when I really started, kind of paying attention more to the turf grass side rather than the dirt digging side. And, I was always accustomed to trade-ins playing a large role.
Mm.
And that seems to be, your dirt digging dealership tends to be a little bit more of a sell to environment. There was, at least back in the day, there was a lot of towing and showing going around, meeting people on a job site, digging a hole to show off what the machine would do, sometimes even transacting out in the field, right? It was a bit of an eye opener for me to then move to a channel that was a buy from organization where,
Mm.
sometimes you pull the neon sign, the chain on the sign, and you turn the coffee pot on, and that's your sign that you're open for business. There's this magnetism to come in and see me in my shop and look at my showroom floor as opposed to chasing people. So a couple of big differences: the sell to versus the buy from, the towing and showing, and the trade-ins being a huge deal. I'm not seeing as big a uptick in the trade-in side of our business as I thought I would, this many
Yeah.
years later. Have you seen that?
Well, I mean, rental is also one that I'm surprised hasn't grown more significantly. I think rental's always kind of been there, but it feels like during economic downturns as well that you would see an uptick in both, like you mentioned, trade-ins and the rental market. but as of yet, not seeing as much of that. I think maybe because people are holding on to their equipment longer. And, also I think the mentality of renting. So the younger generations don't think of renting,
Yeah.
power equipment, the way that maybe historically that was, something common when people tilled their own gardens, for example, or, did their own heavier kind of landscaping projects on their own, but they're outsourcing a lot of that work now instead of doing it themselves and renting the equipment needed to do it. So those two things don't seem to have come into play as strong as what you would expect during a traditional economic downturn.
Yeah, that old adage, like treat it like you rented it, was
Yeah.
probably the worst thing for the rental industry because that I think it scared them off the damage that can be done to a mower when you drive over something
Mhm.
nasty. But there's also deposits and chargebacks and things that could defend or protect that industry in the event of something, say quote unquote catastrophic. But what a great way to try it before you buy it. I
Yeah,
don't know if there's a liability component to that or
there
not.
is. Yeah,
It
insurance, I
has
think,
to
has
be.
gotten hold, like, out of
Yeah.
that market.
We're such a litigious society. That's unfortunate. But I get it too. It can be dangerous. But with anything dangerous comes training. And it feels like, I can test, I'm a testament because I launched some rental businesses. And, getting a product in rental is a great paid trial. They're actually paying you to try something that they wouldn't have otherwise done it. We can't all have the Equip Expo in Louisville every year. We can drive around and cut on all 10 different machines in the same day. But
Yeah.
it sure is a great environment. So I too am a little surprised by that, especially given that again in the dirt digging world, the rental purchase option, the RPO, for those of you not familiar with that acronym, is a very viable
Mm.
option. And you rent it, and if you convert it to a sale within a certain period of time, usually some percentage of those dollars goes towards the purchase. And if you were on an extended rental where you were using a machine for a week or two, you could have what would equate to the down payment offset by, foregoing that rental price point or purchase and really turning it into an asset purchase. So that part
Yeah.
does surprise me. So I'm really glad you addressed that. That was one of my other questions for you. So trade-ins are still light, even on the commercial side, and rental is still light. These are two trends that I would have thought were going to change since
Mhm.
2001, and they haven't yet. Any
Right.
advice on, and I think your point about the kind of the cost of ownership and understanding people hanging on to their machines longer. I firsthand witnessed this, and from 2008 to 2011, I was with a mower manufacturer, and I watched people buy what I would say homeowners were buying up in class. They were buying machines that were purpose built for the commercial contractor because they were letting their contractors go and they were then mowing their own
Mhm.
properties, and they were saying, hey, I'm going to own this thing forever and I just want the best of the best. And then there were contractors who didn't have like a lot of money for the down payments and stuff, and they were buying down in class. So it was a
Yeah.
real topsy turvy time coming out of that real estate bubble. Did you
Mhm.
experience that and have similar takeaways?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it kind of comes down to understanding, the financials of it. So, especially when it's a smaller scale landscape contractor, which many of them are, is understanding when that, machine isn't becoming as productive for you, right? And what
Yeah.
the cost of service, continuing to service it is versus, getting into a new piece of equipment and what your resale value is. And maybe we need to do a better job in the industry as manufacturers or as resources to these manufacturers or to the dealers or the landscape contractors of understanding, what the, trade-in value or resale value of that used piece of equipment is, what that machine is costing you in servicing it, and the productivity loss that you're seeing as a result of having an older piece of equipment in the field. I think just, I think the financials of understanding that an older piece of equipment, and keeping it around longer isn't as good as getting a new piece of equipment is maybe what's holding smaller landscape contractors from making, better decisions about how long to keep equipment.
One of the things that our aim-based product does is it tracks the a contact history timeline. So if
Hmm.
you were visiting an OEM website, or you were opening up all the email that OEM was sending you, all of those touch points would be registered. So at some point when you finally give me your name and information, like you have this chronological history of all these different touch points, and it kind of shows me the bouncing ball of like how long you've been listening or curious and so forth. And I see the value in that from what I'm going to call like a lead scoring standpoint,
Yep.
right? Like you can see when somebody's feverishly clicking everything and reading everything and then visiting the site, that that bubble's about to pop, that they're about ready to do something. Okay. But I also think that that information exists already in these POS systems that the
Mm-hmm.
bulk of OPE is already using. So, and you probably know, and our friends at, Constellation and all these other brands that are out there, they would know this way better than me. But there must be a way to notify yourself that this person has now bought, 4 spindles for this one machine, or they just got a quote on a deck. Like,
Yeah.
sure, we could sell them a deck, or we could have a trigger that says, are you really interested in buying that deck? Could we just maybe
Or should
trade
you?
you out of
Yeah.
that thing? Let us build it up and sell it to somebody else while we sell you a new whole good. Like, does that technology exist? But in your familiarity, does it actually turn into a trigger that gives you like guidance data, or what's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that dealers could have that information available to them to bring to a customer if those smaller landscape contractors are continually coming to them. Some of them will, use their own mechanics, or maybe not be returning
Mm,
consistently to that dealer, and not have the full, aspect of the experience with that landscape contractor. And so that can kind of make it a little more challenging with the smaller ones. But I think that, an established relationship between a landscape contractor and a dealer, I do think that they have those conversations and are able to share that knowledge back and forth. Absolutely. I think it's just in those startups or the smaller folks that are still building their business into something that's going to have a sustained partnership with a dealer partner. And it's one of the advantages, honestly, for a landscape contractor to find the right dealership to partner with and then sustain that relationship over time with all of their
yeah.
products.
That goes back to one of your earlier points when I was trying to discern between the B2B journey and the B2C journey,
Yep.
when I was asking about, what goes into the decision making, or how much does a contractor lean on the advice of a dealer to make the buying decision, and is it different than the consumer? I think
Mhm.
my feeling after reading all of our future of buying stuff is that they're both doing research online, and the consumer seems to be doing a bunch of research so they can show up at the showroom at some point and at least have a working knowledge base of what the questions they're supposed to be asking. Like they still, I think, expect to be led to a decision from the expert, but they've got some catching up to do because this is not the world they live in. So they
Mhm.
want to know enough to like feel smart about the decision they're making when they finally show up, right? And the
Mhm.
contractor, who probably knows a lot more about the bells and whistles, wants that sanity check that you're going to be here for me, you're going to
Yep.
service me, because uptime is of utmost importance and you got to be there for me. Do you feel like those assumptions are accurate, or would you modify that in any way?
Yeah, no, I mean, in both cases, the dealership is selling themselves, really, right? So there's two parts to the sale. It's selling the equipment and getting them right in the right piece of equipment, but saying, you need to buy this from me. And here's the reasons why. I'm going to support you in these ways. You see several ways that dealers do this in dealerships, anything from, they have priority in line when it comes to servicing that equipment, or maybe they have discounted maintenance activities, because they did purchase it from them as a retailer. Or I've even seen like something as cool as like a little tracker that they'll put on the machine itself. And if you came in for all your maintenance, they'll extend the warranty. The dealership themselves does. And so there's a lot of ways that dealers have gotten creative in selling themselves and their brand and their service as a product, so saying you get this product, but then you get us as well. And that that's something that, dealer really has to put a lot of thought into how they're going to sell that part of the product as well in their dealership to both of those types of customers.
That's really interesting. I have not heard that one, and I really like that, the tracker kind of a concept. So, you and I shared stories previously where we were both involved in like lease trade deals where there was a line in the sand and a time, and the machine was being traded back,
Mhm.
and the channel would get involved in the trade in and so forth. My thinking is that creates for a very healthy environment. Like, just look at the auto industry, so far ahead of like everything we're doing, right? But what percentage of cars are leased versus bought or sold? I don't even care like what the number is. I just know there's so many out there that the math is there and that there's a model there for it. So my parents, ironically, are driving two vehicles right now that were leased vehicles that they happen to buy prior to COVID. And at the time of COVID, with such a shortage, the valuation was so much higher in these cars that they ended up buying them. It's like, what a crazy kind of a story in a way that you'd lease a car for 2 or 3 or 4 years and then turn around and buy it out. But the residual is so much higher than what they owe. They're like, of course, we're going to buy this. And they're still running, and they're going to run for a bunch more years. Because the model was there, it was easy peasy. They made really math-based decisions. And I feel like in our space that we aren't tracking enough of that. And I
Mhm.
don't really know where the problem lies per se, because we have great POS systems. We don't have a lot of CRMs, and
Mhm.
that's maybe an issue. So the customer tracking piece of it is more at the till, and
Yep.
maybe some like good reporting coming out of that space would help us. Like, I think coach our consumers on when might be the right time to offload a particular asset. I know
Yep.
I feel like I'm harping on that, but I'm coming at it from different angles because I really want to understand what we could do better there. And if anybody's doing it well, I want to pay close attention to it. So I'd love share any stories you can on that topic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so the let's talk total cost of ownership for a minute, because recently in our second conversation we kind of delved into that pretty far, and we were talking about there is a design life for a machine, and let's just say it's whatever 2,000 or 2,500 hours depending on the brand. This machine is supposed to run so many hours, and people buy it, like contractors, let's say, buy it, and they start putting it through the paces, and then there's some flags that come up along the way, that maybe you're encroaching in this time when you'd be better off like sort of offloading it, or whatever. Tell me about, like, what's your worldview on that, the overall health of the industry as it relates to that, or maybe what we could do better as a group of businesses, small businesses.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things with that. One of the pieces that I've actually spent a lot of time on, when it comes to landscape contractors, is understanding even just the wearable parts related to that piece of equipment. And so often when they're thinking about a new piece of equipment, they're not thinking, well, I'm going to have to change the belt this many times. I'm going to have to change the blades this many times, or whatever the case is. And so they're really just looking at the equipment price and comparing those two. So if they have two brands they're considering, to use for their fleet. And often they'll have a fleet of the same equipment or similar equipment, because it helps to keep that part of it less complex, like which belts they need or which blades they need, or the different service components that they're going to have to stock, if they're going to do their own maintenance, or that they'll have to purchase from their local dealer. And so I spent a lot of time early on in my career looking at that. What's the total cost of ownership, even just within the warranty period, for example, on wearable components. So, is brand X really more expensive than brand Y when you consider how much, a set of blades is, or how much the belts are, or that type of thing. And so that's one thing that I would always advise, a dealer or, landscape contractor to take into consideration, is the total cost of ownership, even within those first 5 years or so. And then after that point, a lot of it does come down to the quality, of the equipment itself, and really how hard you're working it. And so, there's a lot of variables there with really how long you should keep that, equipment after the warranty period. And then how much residual value the product has. You mentioned those high-end homeowners, we'll call them, or prosumers, we'll call them, who have enough acreage that they're looking to buy up into kind of that mid-commercial platform. And I think that one of the key things into moving that product into that channel would be to add some creature comfort features, put a suspension seat on it or something like that, in order to then sell it into that market, to up the value of it as as a secondary sale, or as a trade-in, or consider selling it to a smaller, just getting started landscape contractor, that might be only have one machine or two machines in their fleet, and are looking to just get started, or even college student or high school student that's just looking for a mower to use for that kind of thing.
Okay, I love that. I love that idea. So often in my years in OPE, I'd see like a seat promo, $500 seat value or whatever.
Yeah.
Buy this machine and you get this whiz bang seat. And I could totally see taking the old unit, upgrading the seat, because you're giving it to somebody who's using it for themselves. And it wasn't lost on me that the contractors buying for themselves often had sort of a plush environment, and the contractors not buying for themselves didn't
Yep.
always have a plush environment, right?
That's exactly
So
the way it works.
yeah. So and also think of that jack stand, the kind of lever jack stand that gets the deck off
Mm-hmm.
the ground. So if you don't have a shop with a chain fall and a hoist or something like that, then those things become infinitely more valuable. So as an upsell takeaway for your second life user, as you're retiring that once commercial unit to a gentler second use,
Yep.
those could be some great options to help you remarket that. Brilliant
Yeah,
idea.
because the homeowner isn't really going to put a lot of hours on it, and so
Mhm.
in general, and so it might get one more year in commercial use is very different than one more year
Yeah,
in residential use.
100%. So this is taking me back a ways, but way back, a friend of mine bought, I want to say it was a BMW. And at the time, and perhaps they're still doing this, I don't own a BMW, but there was like a service package bundled in. And I kind of liked where you were going with that, because when you look at your first 2 years of life, when your oil changes and I don't know if people are taking mowers in the commercial space for blade sharpening, but if you could tie it to when it was going in anyway, oil change and like a 10-point
Hmm.
inspection and blade sharpening, if that were part of the value prop, that does
Yep.
start to skew, whole good against whole good isn't the case anymore. It's whole good plus a service package against a whole good. Now you can sell an apple and an orange, but you can highlight the value of the service, which we know is the better profit center anyway for a shop, and you get extra eyeballs on the machine more frequently. So I really like that idea that you threw out there.
Yeah,
Any
and
other
if the
nuggets on
dealer
that?
is participatory, it really ups the value of that partnership again that they're selling, because they probably have a better opportunity or outlet to offload used equipment than a landscape contractor might.
Totally. I was involved with a couple of multi-million-dollar deals that had these inspections, the 20 or 30-point inspections at the end. And if you
Mhm.
time something like that right around the timing of a warranty expiration, you can get it in a like new status at the time it was designed to be done with its first life anyway. And what a great model that might be. I know we weren't the first to do it, and certainly we weren't the last.
Mhm.
Has that increased in the last 5 or 10 years? Are you seeing much more of that, or not really?
In this economic downturn kind of is just beginning.
Hmm.
Um, so I think it will depend on how sustained this has been, but I haven't personally seen an uptick in it. So far, it's more what I've seen is that, individuals, whether commercial customers or homeowners, have been just holding on to the equipment for longer. And so we're seeing an uptick in, service, or parts, as a result. But not yet seeing, some of those things. There just isn't many used products in outdoor power equipment space. Even just my own personal experience in selling, a machine I had owned for some time. When I put that out for sale, I mean, it was grabbed up and in less than an hour. So, I think that there isn't a lot of used equipment out there.
Hmm.
It's similar to, maybe homes or used cars right now are really difficult to find too. So I think that there's a market for them. There's just not a lot of them out there.
Interesting. So this economic downturn that really has just begun, but it's been foreshadowed for a minute. You've talked about it in the
Mhm.
article with the other industry leading women. I heard about it in OPEI. We've been hearing about it for a while.
Mhm.
So, any lessons we can take from recent examples? Anything? How do we shore up our house and get ready for what's probably going to be the next 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I think the biggest thing is to lean into what's continuing to drive revenue for your dealership, and that could be any number of the things that we just talked about. But focusing on those sides of your business at this point in time, and then just being smart about who you're choosing as a brand partner, and that really goes along the full channel. Um, you know, I think that product brands right now that are going to be able to be more nimble and manufacture on demand and provide product on demand are going to win in this environment. I just don't know that people are going to be holding on, and by people, I mean dealerships or manufacturers are going to be holding on to the levels of inventory that they were comfortable with holding on to in the past. And so I think that's going to reverberate through the entire channel itself. And so being able to have quick access to product so that you don't miss sales is going to be a key thing when we're all holding lower levels of inventory. So that's something important. And I think that, the things that we mentioned earlier were like, making sure that that customer experience is on point is going to be so critical, especially for an independent dealer that, isn't part of a franchise or a chain or a multi-store location. Just making sure that what that customer experience is when they walk in your door is up to snuff with, other high-end retailers in your industry, because there's been a lot of consolidation, and there's going to continue to be um, as outdoor power equipment dealerships move to the next generation, or continue to, what we've been seeing is consolidation of that space. So franchise or turn into multi-store dealerships. As that continues, we're going to eventually see that retail presence and customer experience continue to elevate as more and more of that occurs. And an independent dealer that may have just one location or a few locations is going to have to scale up with those trends and the impacts that those types of dealerships are going to have on this industry.
Consolidation is a really interesting thing for me. As I mentioned in our earlier conversation, I spent the last 2-3 years in prop tech, working with CRMs and automated products, marketing automation for real estate. It's really the only time I haven't been around outdoor power. And in that 3 years, it also they were COVID years. And I came back and I saw this, what I looked like attrition in the OPE channel. At one time, there were like 18,000 dealers, but if you subtract out kind of parts only, those selling whole goods was in the 15K range, and now it
Mhm.
sounds like it's down in the 12K. And we talked a lot about that, and how there was consolidation. You really illuminated some of that for me. So here's the question here. Given that there was consolidation and you have sort of new blood in the channel, um, I'm interested to know about like what happens to the customer journey. I know, like in big picture, you see big VCs buy companies and they sort of almost lose their personality a lot of times.
Yeah.
It
Mhm.
becomes a mathematical equation rather than a customer experience. And where we live at ground level with our people, that all we see is, I'm buying from you because I trust you, like you said earlier. I'm not buying from some nameless, faceless place. Like, do you feel a difference, or is the customer journey still intact? Are we still dealing with kind of small business with a little bit of VC money behind it, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's I think it's generational, so I think, the older generations appreciate, small family owned businesses, and, it's part of what brought them into those dealerships. And they're comfortable in shopping in those environments. But as the younger and younger generations are, walking into those same stores, they have a better comfort level with, franchised, similar, um, multi-store type of experiences because it's what they've become accustomed to with the rest of their shopping experiences. And so, a younger consumer could definitely feel off-put, by an environment that's doesn't look as cookie cutter, and it doesn't look as polished, and it doesn't look as formal as a buying experience they might get with walking into a clothing store. All the Kohl's stores look the same, or all the you name it, stores look the same, and that brings a confidence and a comfort level to them, in that they aren't going to, get wool pulled over their eyes or get taken
Right.
advantage of or something like that. Um, you know, they don't want to haggle, they don't want to talk about the price. They want a sticker on it and know what it is, or do some research online and know what the price is before they walk in. And so, I think a lot of it depends on, the demographics of the consumer itself. We know that outdoor power equipment purchasers tend to be a little older and a little more male, and so their comfort level with a traditional store presence of an independent dealer is there. But as this new generation comes, they're going to have to employ more of those kind of retail presence of a more traditional buying experience that a younger consumer would be looking for.
Well, I dated myself even by asking the question the way I did, because you can see which camp I'm in. I'm in the camp that wants the trusted older than me person to
Yeah.
explain to me and lead me to my final decision. And I do want to have some preparation. But if I feel relatively confident, I'm maybe not doing a ton of research. Like if I feel like, all right, I know this person, I know what they sell, and I bought from them before, so I'm going to go back and have them guide me around, and I'm going to probably not buy the top one, but I'm going to probably buy the second or third one down. That's kind of my MO. My kids would have researched that already, and to your point, if they can't look into the business, if they don't have a window into the business, they don't have reviews, or they don't
Mhm.
see inventory, we don't bother to
Yep.
go. It's like, why would I drive to a business if I don't know they're open? Like
It's not
it's
there. Yeah. Or it's
just
not.
old school thinking, and we see that. Like my company today, one of our fastest growing features or products is bringing inventory to life in the customer journey. So if you're shopping a dealer, that's great. Here's my 5 options in metropolitan, whatever, Atlanta, to find a certain widget.
Yep.
But if I'm looking for a very specific one, I don't care if it's a Fender guitar or a, Bobcat skid steer or whatever. But if I want a very specific feature, I want to know the features there before I'm driving across town. And if the dealer locator tells me, all right, there's 5 dealers in this area and only one of them has that SKU, I'm actually driving all the way across town to go to that one that has it, rather
For sure.
than hope somebody else does. It's one of our fastest growing features. And I do believe that this demographic is a large part of the reason, this younger skewed research audience.
Yeah. And they're definitely used to uh, any online shopping experience to tell them specifically if the thing is in stock there. So, we're 100% accustomed to that. As younger consumers, I'll put myself in the younger consumer camp. I don't know if I still can, but we're definitely conditioned to know, is it there or is it not there? So they're not really willing to drive in if the thing that they may or may not be interested in, they might end up in a different machine once they get there. But the one that they kind of narrowed their search in on, they want to know if it's in that store. You're absolutely right.
I have because you've been on so many different sides of the business, I want to ask, like, as we start to wrap up here, let's think about, you're in the dealer camp. You've been involved with dealer advisory councils and boards and groups, committees, and so forth. If you had to take that, paraphrase for me what the dealers would want an OEM to know, like if for you to take care of us or service us or really get our attention over the next 4 or 5 years, what is it the OEM needs to hear from that dealer base? What are they going to tell
I think the biggest thing, like immediately, like right now, is really, around inventory levels and floor plan. So I think that's the, big rub right now going on. The industry is pushing manufacturers to be more nimble about, not to load them up like a loaded dealer is a good dealer. That kind of mentality has to go. I think we saw that during COVID. In the automotive sector, there were no cars on lots, but cars were still being sold. And so there's got to be a really good balance and partnership between what you talked about and having the right product in stock at the right dealerships so we can get consumers to walk in the doors and kick tires. But we also, can't send, a dealer, you know, 30 machines of the same SKU and expect them to sell those. And so, big booking orders, big load in orders like that, I think have to become a thing of the past. And so I think inventory management through the channel, from the consumer, like you said, visibility to the dealer, moving around inventory as it's appropriate, and keeping lower levels of inventory across the channel is something we really got to focus on. I think in this next year for sure, to continue to
Yeah.
allow success here, especially with interest rates they are on floor plan and consumer purchases. I don't know that we're going to see relief from that for sure before the election, but hopefully there's some relief in the next year or so. But that's a ways off.
So while you were saying that, by the way, I totally agree. I love those points and those ideas. And my OEM self, like my history OEM self, was squirming a little bit at this notion of FOMO. Like what if as soon as I don't load that
I know.
dealer and there's a floor plan credit sitting there, what prevents the dealer? Like what do you tell the dealers? How do you, what prevents the dealer from just going and grabbing X number of mowers from four different
Someone
people and
else.
having that supermarket mentality that seems to be so pervasive to have something for everybody? What
Yes.
do you say to the dealers then?
It's totally pervasive in this industry, and it's not just on the whole goods side, it's on the parts side too. This idea of booking half or more of your year's purchases at one time.
Hmm.
um, and I think that more and more, as OEMs start to build stronger relationships with dealers and have more visibility back and forth with inventory, that can push our industry in a better um, a better space, I guess, when it comes to those inventory pieces. And again, other industries like we talked about, RV and power sports and marine and others, are much further down the line in terms of that. And so hopefully it becomes something where there's like a forecast, for example, but not an order. So forecast, and then fulfilling that as the dealer needs it, and not just having a stockpile of units in the back parking lot, just waiting to be sold. And it's a seasonal business too. So there's always going to be some of that, right? Because you get the spring and you need the product, for the spring. And dealers are never going to have, the same amount of inventory year round. That's certainly not, going to be the case. But the better job we can do of having the right product at the right time for the consumers is going to, draw more consumers into the stores.
Totally makes sense. I like what you were saying earlier about here, the way I took it away, I'm paraphrasing. Narrow your relationship focus to the people who got you here, the people who you can
Yeah.
count on, the people that'll carry you to the next level, and invest more deeply in those folks. And that doesn't necessarily mean go super deep in inventory, but you need that trusted OEM partner that you can rely on to be there for you with inventory because you skinnied up your inventory. So you got to make darn sure the person that whatever flag you are flying, that person's
Yeah.
got you covered with inventory. And
Well,
they're not just sitting on barns and barns of it either, because the cost of goods are racking up
it
money
is.
too. So
Yeah, and
communicate,
I think during
right?
COVID, we were, a lot of dealers were grabbing at a lot of brands and a lot of manufacturers because it was kind of like, who has some product, that I can sell.
Yeah.
And so they maybe expanded the amount of brands that they had available within their dealership. And it's definitely the time probably to narrow the scope of, who you're partnering with, because we all have inventory, or all the manufacturers, pretty much have inventory at this point. And so, not to be exclusive with one brand, I'd never recommend that, for a dealer. But, to narrow the set of brands that you're carrying, to those that you can partner with and have this, more inventory cohesion with, and try to keep inventories as low as you can, and
Totally
use
makes
this
sense.
year for sure.
Totally makes sense. So I have a question for you about like take yourself back to the beginning of this OPE ride. What do you tell the younger version of Angela? Like, all right, you're about to embark on a 20-year thing. Can't imagine it, but you're a young person now. What do you tell yourself? How do you do it? Do you do it differently, or what advice would you give yourself way back then?
No, I definitely didn't think coming out of college that I would have such a such a love for outdoor power equipment. Like, why would I care about lawnmowers? But now it's like, this. Every time I drive by a lawnmower, I'm looking, or a snowblower, every kind of piece of equipment, I'm like looking at what brand it is, and everyone's garages. I'm a garage creeper. I just like look in people's yards and garages at what brands of mowers they have. And so I don't think that is ever going to leave me after close to 20 years. I don't know if I can ever stop looking and creeping in people's garages. And I would have never imagined that, I would, have such a love for these products, and what they do for consumers, or even just, for myself. I mean, I think a lot of people during COVID also recognized that they really enjoy being in their yards, and they enjoy in maintaining them. I know OPI does a lot of this with the turf mutt program and others. Like, spending time in your yard um, can be very enjoyable, and it's something that, having the equipment to do so allows you to kind of just get back into that space, um, and enjoy it. So
I love it. Are you a gardener? What do you do for fun?
I do have a garden. Yeah, my husband and I argue over who gets to mow the lawn. Our kids are growing a little bit, so this is the first year that my children have actually driven my zero turn. But before that, when our kids were young, it's like who gets to snow blow and who gets to mow the lawn, because it's our 1 hour of quiet, I guess, so to speak, and getting away from the young children. But yeah, definitely gardening, and having the best looking lawn in the neighborhood is always something that I've enjoyed.
I've had to readjust since our recent move a year and a half ago out to Las Vegas. I'm not, as those of you that watch this on a video, I'm not in Vegas now with the big trees in the background. I happen to be
Yeah.
in Michigan, but we're in Vegas and there's nothing growing other than some trees that are heavily irrigated. And fortunately, they provide a little shade around our pool. So I've had to re-find what would have been my outdoor yard work, green thumb interest to other things. And we found it. We
Mm.
fill it in with other activities, including swimming in the pool and hiding from the heat. But yeah, it's weird to be in such an arid environment after growing up in the Midwest and moving to Florida and having such a lush environment around me all the time. So
Yeah.
things to get used to, but that's what we
Hmm.
do. Things are always changing. Well, Angela, this has been a fascinating conversation, as I knew it would be. This is now number 3, and none of them have disappointed. So thank you very much for indulging me in all my questions and let me pull at the threads. And it's just been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thank you.
Of course.